What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this episode, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet. We're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time. I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. If you're listening to us currently on iTunes or Spotify, welcome in. Please make sure you leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. What's up, everybody? My name is Jeff Nadu. This is episode 230 of the Sit Down. As always, we are powered by Profit X, and I want to take a little time to promote Profit X because I'm going to tell you right now, this is the future of wagering on sports. I know a lot of you out there like to bet on football or baseball or basketball. Everything's kind of coming together right now. The NFL, college football, you got baseball playoffs coming up. Right now, you got to go get Profit X. Download the app, use my promo code Jeff Nadu. You're going to get some of the best odds in the business. And when you're betting every day, it's important that you're getting the best price. It's a sleek, easy to use app, and it's a betting exchange, which essentially means that you can create your own odds or you're betting odds set by others. So they're never going to limit your wagering. They're never going to cut you off if you win too much. And in states like Texas and California that don't have legalized sports betting, you can use Profit X in those states. So let's say you live in San Diego and you want to bet on football this weekend. If you just download Profit X, get an account, deposit, use my promo code Jeff Nadu, you can bet this weekend. That's how simple it is. Do what I did, do what a lot of people did. Go get Profit X. Click the link if you're on YouTube in the pinned comment. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, just download the app, use my promo code Jeff Nadu, and you open your account, deposit, and you're ready to go. ProfitX.co. Use my promo code Jeff Nadu. Let's get in, everybody, to yet another great episode of the show. And this week, we have another interview. He's here with me right now. Let's bring in FBI Agent Seamus McElearney. We're going to talk about his book, his very distinguished career with the FBI. We've talked to a lot of FBI guys over the years, everybody from Jack Garcia to Mike Campi. We talked to HSI. We've talked to NYPD. We've kind of run the gamut with the FBI, and today we might have our most distinguished agent yet, Seamus McElearney. Thank you for coming on the show. You had a long and distinguished career with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You even met the president once for your work with the Bureau. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
All right, Jeff, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about your book. I actually read your book in a series of a few days. People contact me all the time with books and, hey, read this. Let me know what you think. And, I always am fascinated by people like yourself who, you're just kind of a regular guy. You join the Bureau. You get into organized crime. We had Campi on a couple of months ago. His book's right there on my shelf. He was kind of similar in a way to you, really kind of focused, very involved with investigations and, flipping people and getting just the lay of the land with everything. I want to start at the beginning. This is our first time speaking to you. You're Irish. You have a very Irish name. You're from the Bronx. You're the son of Irish immigrants. Tell me what your life was like as a child.
Okay. I was born in the city and I was raised in the Bronx next to 207th Street and Bainbridge Avenue. I grew up there and then I went to Cardinal Spellman High School in the Bronx, and then my parents decided to move to Westchester at that time. I still remained in the Bronx, so I went to high school there, and that's where I grew up. It was great, we had a very great place to grow up there. Going through school, like, you learned a lot. I had some friends that went the right way. I had some friends that went the wrong way. So you had to make choices. My parents always just taught me to study hard. That was the big thing that they told us. They really couldn't direct us on what to do. So when I went through school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to Iona College, excuse me. When I got out of school, I really didn't know what I really wanted to do. My parents actually helped me get through school, so I didn't have loans. So as a way to kind of repay them back, I worked for my dad for about 2 years. And then someone told me about a job in a bank. So I worked for a bank for about 2 years. Really didn't like when I worked behind a desk. So I actually met an FBI agent, and the job seemed just really, really neat to me. It was very diverse. You were doing something different every single day. You could be going to court. You could be speaking to a CEO. You could be doing surveillance. And it just seemed like it grabbed my attention. At that point in time, I started to get into organized crime, where I started to read books about it. And I was lucky enough to get selected to go to the FBI. I went down to Virginia for training. Right before I went to training, actually, I had hurt my knee. It was a long time knee injury that I had, where my kneecap would actually physically pop out. And instead of getting it fixed, I would just pop it back in. So I went down to training, and I actually hurt my knee down there. And when you go down to training, there's two types of instructors that you get. There's one that likes to run, and then one that likes to fight. I would prefer the one that liked to fight. When I walked in, and the instructor that I had was probably about 5', 220 pounds soaking wet, he liked to run. So unfortunately, I had the runner. And as a result of the running constantly, I had a bad knee, and I hurt myself down there. They wanted to, what it was called, recycle you, either send you back home. And I was just determined to stick it out. So I later found out that I had a torn ACL. I stuck out the training down there with a torn ACL, which is a very tough thing to do if anyone ever had a bad knee. And I was able to graduate on time. And what happens is with the Bureau, they determine after about 7 weeks as to where you're going to be sent. Thankfully, I was sent back to New York because that's my roots. Because if they had sent me to, say, Texas or something, I really don't know if I was able to deal with that. So thankfully, I was sent back to New York. When you're back here for about 6 months, they send you through a rotation, through surveillance, through the operations center. There's different things that they send you through. And then ultimately, you get sent to a squad. During that 6-month time period, I was trying to do as much as I possibly can, right? You want to try to distinguish yourself from other agents. You work nights, weekends, you work as many shifts as you possibly can, try to get a good reputation, because everyone knows within the Bureau, your reputation is what's going to make or break you. And thankfully, I had spoken to a couple of people on organized crime, and sooner or later, I got drafted to organized crime. In December of 1998, I got sent to a squad called C10, which at that particular time was handling the Banano family. So when I first got to C10, I was working the Bananos. At that particular time, which was in December of 1998, they were also starting to work the DeCavalcante family. And you're probably wondering, like, okay, how is the New York FBI working a Jersey family? What happened was, prior to me getting to the squad in January of 1998, two things have happened. There was the robbery of the World Trade Center, where I'm not sure if you had remembered that, but there was individuals that robbed the World Trade Center. They actually did rob the World Trade Center, but the mistake that they made is they came out of the floor and they took their mask off right away. The mastermind behind that robbery was a gentleman named Ralph Guarino. Ralph Guarino was smart enough to know that all those guys got arrested rather quickly within days. He was smart enough to call the FBI and try to get out in front of this, because he was ultimately going to get arrested pretty quickly. He called a famous FBI agent by the name of George Hanna. George Hanna was a very street agent. He's from Brooklyn. He grew up there his entire life. He's a legend in himself. And he was able to basically flip Ralph into becoming a witness. He became a proactive witness. When I mean a proactive witness, that means he's going to make consensual recordings. And he basically proactively cooperated Ralph from January of 1998 until December of 1999. 2 weeks after that robbery, a murder transpired. The murder was Joseph Canigliaro Jr. His nickname was Joe Pitts. Joe Pitts was in a wheelchair. How he got in a wheelchair was him and a DeCavalcante soldier named Jimmy Gallo basically went to go collect money from a loan shark victim. Jimmy Gallo shot the victim, the loan shark victim, and basically shot Joe Pitts and paralyzed him. It was just the cost of doing business. There was no hard feelings about that. That was back in the 70s. And Joe Pitts was actually in a wheelchair for about 30 years or so before he got killed. He was a ruthless person, though. He used to actually call people over to them in his wheelchair and shoot them and kill them. And then he would get people to bury the body, which is an insane thing to think about, correct? Mm-hmm. So those are the two things that kind of started the case. when you have a proactive witness, you never know where that witness is going to take you.
Right.
And that's how we kind of got to the DeCavalcantes, because unbeknownst to the FBI is that the DeCavalcantes had a violent Brooklyn faction. Yeah. And that was numerous people such as Vinnie Palermo, Anthony Capo, Anthony Rotundo, and George Hanna proactively operated Ralph Guarino for about 2 years up until December of 1999.
I want to talk about the Brooklyn kind of involvement, because the one thing I've noticed about that family is obviously they have the Elizabeth group, right? The John Rickeys and the guys like that. But you mentioned Anthony Rotundo, whose father was a longstanding member of that family from Brooklyn. A lot of people don't know Vinnie Palermo's brother was a member of the Colombo family.
Correct.
Palermo.
Yep.
They had Rudy Ferrone. They had all sorts of guys in that area. But I want to go back a little bit before you joined the Bureau. You mentioned like you're from the Bronx. When you were a kid, you know, growing up, did you ever see mob guys? Did you know much about that world? You read books, like you?
Not really. The neighborhood that I grew up in was mostly an Irish American neighborhood, so we really didn't see too many wise guys there. We had heard about them, and of course, you know, because I went to Spelman, and there was a lot of people next to Portchester, which a lot of Banana people are around there. So you would meet them during high school and things like that. And when you went to high school, you know, there was a lot of people that you start to run into there, so you would start to learn about it more and more. You know, so you learn a lot as you start to grow up quickly.
Sure. When you join like the FBI, I always wondered this. Obviously, if you become like a cop, a lot of the time, you know, you start in like as like a beat cop or whatever, like, you know, in a neighborhood or wherever. Do you start in just like surveillance? Do you start just doing all sorts of different things? How does that work?
So when you join the FBI, when you go to New York, there's a rotation that they put you through. So you'll do surveillance for a couple of months. We work the operations center, and then you also work the applicant squad. So when, unbeknownst to me, when I was going through the process, people would show up at our office where I was working to interview people that I was working with to do a background check. And here I am thinking that I'm talking to a seasoned agent. Not that I didn't know, but when I joined the Bureau then and got through the process, then I found out that the individual who was interviewing me had only been on the job himself for about a year. So that's part of the new process when you become an agent. So there's a whole rotation that you go through for about 6 months. This is just in New York. In the other field offices, it might be a little bit different, but in New York, that's the way it is. And then it's basically you learn as you go. And like, you know, we're going to get into that because I don't want to jump the gun here, but Anthony Capo is the one that schooled me on organized crime. And that's a picture of him right there.
Yeah.
And that's from his arrest in December of 1999.
You had a, you know, and one thing about your book that I realized is you had kind of one of the more distinct relationships I've ever seen with an agent and kind of a cooperator, right? You get him to flip. But one thing I also noticed about your book, you mentioned in the book that when you join the FBI, a lot of people just assume like you graduate college and just go to the FBI. It's more of like they want people that have experienced life, whether it be like maybe you were, like you said, in a bank, you were like some sort of accountant, or you know, you had some sort of. Why is that? Is it just they want people to have experience in the world, the real world, or?
Right. So back then, the average age of an agent was close to 30 years old. That's the age that they wanted people to go in. And the reason for that is they wanted you to have some life experience so that you could bring something to the table that you've experienced before. So after I went to college and worked for my dad for about 2 years to repay back him, like trying to get me through school without loans, I went into audit. So I worked in banks. I worked for an insurance company. So I did audit for roughly about 6 years or so, and before I started the process of getting into the FBI. But that's what they like. They liked accountants. They liked lawyers. They liked people that were in the service, like the Army, the Navy, whatever. So, but that's like the fields that they like. They want people to have experience so that when you join the Bureau, you can bring life experiences that you've done some sort of jobs before, as opposed to being right out of college where you don't have any life experiences. So 30 years old was the basic average age that they would use back then.
So in terms of Guarino, he's kind of involved in this crime. He wants to get out of it. So he starts talking. He's an associate of these people, and he realizes it should be a treasure trove for him because he get out of the robbery bit that he had. And how does it kind of transfer to Capo, Rotundo, all those guys?
So, as I said, he identified the Brooklyn faction of the DeCavalcantes. He was like a lifelong guy who was into truck hijackings like that. So he kind of got pushed into the DeCavalcantes of the Brooklyn faction, and that's how we started to get into them. So he got into like Joe Scafani, Anthony Rotundo, and he just kind of, there's a picture of Mr. Rotundo right there. So he just started to get to those guys, and you just never know where a proactive witness is going to go to. And it wasn't just the DeCavalcantes. He got to some Colombos. He got to some of the Lucchese family. There was different families of that initial indictment. Now, what happened was it got to about December of 1999 where we had to pull him off the street because there started to be whispers that he might be cooperating. There was also, there was whispers after, which we didn't know until after we made the arrest, that there actually was a leak in the Southern District where there was allegedly a court reporter who was feeding information to the Genovese family, to Fritzi Giovanelli. So I get tasked. I'm a brand new agent. When you're a brand new agent, you're doing all the grunt work. As I said, we had Ralph, who made probably close to 300 recordings during that 2-year period. We had a dedicated surveillance team on Ralph to protect him. It was SO2 that was led by Joseph Scanzo. So they were on him where they could be surveilling him like twice a day. So as part of being a new agent, I was tasked to basically put all the surveillance logs together, file them, get them into a file, make copies for the attorney. Same thing with the consensual recordings. So it was great for me, even though it was grunt work, but it was a way for me to learn the case. So I was learning like pictures and consensual recordings, listen to these guys, and it was a great way for me to learn the case. So when it came down to take down the case, I thought I was just going to be on a surveillance team or on like an arrest team. I didn't know what I was going to be doing, or even if I was going to be on the team, because I was so new. But unbeknownst to me, they actually made me the team leader of Anthony Capo. I didn't even know who Anthony was at the time. I later found out during my process, because what I did was I studied him from head to toe, just like I was going to take a test, that he was a very violent soldier within the DeCavalcante family who was hated by law enforcement because of the way that he talked to law enforcement. So, but I had watched George Hanna because he was sort of my mentor. I saw the way that he treated Ralph, and it was always with organized crime. You want to get to the next player where you're trying to get people to flip. So that's why I decided that's how I was going to try to approach Mr. Capo. And at the same time, the Eastern District was trying to get Anthony Capo arrested as well. There was kind of a race to actually get Anthony arrested because they knew that there was a lot of charges on him from the Eastern District as well. So I got tasked as a team leader to arrest him, and he lived in Staten Island. And that was the beginning of the end for him, where I studied him from head to toe. I went to go arrest him that day. He was not at his house. So we went to arrest him at his house. He wasn't there. So then that changed everything. All the planning that I had went out the window, and now we're on the fly. I have to go to his mom's house. So I got to meet his mom, his stepfather. I saw right then and there the relationship that he had with his parents. So that was kind of different from what I had heard about him, right? That he was such a ruthless person. And then we brought him, I got him in the car, and we started to get a little banter. And I had done my research and found out that he was a diabetic as well. So I made sure that I had chocolate, I had orange juice as well, just in case his blood sugar was low. And he saw that I did these things. So we started to develop a relationship that day. He also was a Cowboy fan. I'm a Steeler fan. So we had this instant banter back and forth related to that. And as I said, one of the things that I did was I learned and I studied him, and I saw the charges that he had at that particular time. If I remember correctly, there was a conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri, and there was a stock fraud charge. So he immediately invoked his right to counsel. So I told him, don't say a word, right? I said, I just want you to listen to me. And what I did based upon some of the recordings that I got from Ralph is I knew related to the conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri that there was a cop on his block. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't kill him. Their plan was to basically ring Charlie's doorbell. And instead of doing a ring and run, they were going to ring the doorbell and kill him. So because they had a cop on the block, that's why they did it. So I just gave him a little tidbit and made him think about that. I told him, don't say a word because he had already invoked his right to counsel. I said, just listen to me. So it was kind of like food for thought. Then I would play with him and say, okay, what's your date of birth? Before he could answer, I would tell him his date of birth. I'd ask him, what's your social security number? Before he could answer that, I tell him. So I let him know that I knew everything about him. So that was made him think about things.
Real quick, when you got him in the car, you knew the kind of guy he was. He was a ruthless individual. I've heard stories about, he was in a bar and I think stabbed somebody over a girl.
He had a bad reputation. And, as we'll start to talk more, it's like when I started to debrief him later, some of the things that he was telling me, it was scary to, just to sit there next to him, just hear him say things like it was nothing. You know what I mean? But one of the things that he did say on that ride back was, and I don't know how he was kind of trying to say it to me, but he let us know that there was a leak. And he said, we knew you were coming because I got a call to let them know that I had him. And then I started to hear that a lot of people were not at their homes when they went to go pick them up.
They knew. Yeah.
And then we knew that there was a leak. So that had started everything. So just to fast forward, we spent the day together. There's a lot of banter back and forth. Then I had to deal with his father, and he saw that I treated him with respect. And, because of the charges that he had, he decided to cooperate. That was the goal, right? To get him to flip. Now, unbeknownst to me, because I think I'm young, I'm just trying to do my job, I had never known that no one had ever flipped before in that family. No made member had ever flipped in the history of their 100+ years. So he flips, and now we have to proffer, right? That's when they come in and they basically have to tell you everything that they did, and then you determine if you want to get to the next stage to actually make them a witness or not. So during the first proffer, he comes in, and first of all, when you do things like this, the first thing you have to do is make them eat the indictment. What that means is have them tell you about all the charges in the indictment that you just charged them with to make sure that they're telling you the truth and making sure that you got everything right. So that's the first thing he did, that we were solid on the conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri and also solid on the stock fraud charge. Then he tells us about the leak. Then he tells us about the Fred Weiss murder. Then he tells us about the John D'Amato murder, which we knew nothing about. So, and when you have a very short period of time to actually get this information out of him, because he can't be away from his cell for too long, because then the wise guys are going to know that something is up.
You're going to wonder what's up.
So then, during this quick time period, we have to assess, is this guy telling us the truth or not? And we all decide. And plus, I'm in a room, I'm brand new, right? So I'm in a room with Kenny McCabe, legendary Southern District investigator, George Hanna, legendary agent, Maria Barton, awesome AUSA, who just put this indictment together, and me. I'm keeping my mouth shut so I don't say anything stupid. You know what I mean? So less is more here. So, and I'm just trying to learn. So everything works out fine. And then he's telling us where he thinks the bodies are buried, where he thinks John D'Amato is buried, where he thinks Joseph Garofano is buried. And he thinks they're buried at Phil LaMella's place up in Marlboro, New York, because Phil LaMella had a recycling center up there. He didn't put the bodies there, but he was told that that's where they went. So we reconvene. We believe he's telling us the truth. So now we're going to have to move him, right? So this starts a whole chain ball of reaction. And then I'm going to have to start to get a search warrant because it's in the Northern District of New York. That weekend, I have to get together, put together a search warrant, and we're going to go and do a search warrant up there. So that's what we do like the next week, right?
From his arrest to his cooperation, how quick was that? And
It
when
was
you
in a
answered
week.
that, okay, wow, it was within a week.
Yeah, it
When
was
you had
quick.
him first in the car, there was an old Gambino guy. His name was Fat Andy Ruggiano, and he made a comment once that informants are born; they're not made, right? They're born that way. Did you get the feeling that Capo? You mentioned he he had a reputation maybe for talking down to the police. Wasn't a big fan of them. Most wise guys aren't. Did you get the feeling that he would flip? I mean, did you feel like maybe he's a little weak in that sense? It
Not really.
was
Like
a
there was
surprise to you.
banter that was going back and forth, and I didn't think he was going to flip. I just, you know what I think it was too. I think, and we had talked about this as years went by. Like he saw in me that I was just a regular street guy, and I think that helped things where you could be just a regular person. I wasn't some sort of a nerd or something that, and he often joked, which is a little scary, that maybe if I went the right path, he could have been an agent. I'm like, I don't think that could have happened, but he could have lived a different life if he had chosen a different path. And now all these guys, they grow up in a different hood, so you can't judge them for that, right? They're all taught, to hate like law enforcement too. So it is what it is. But we would have these discussions like that. You know what I mean? So he decided to flip really quickly. I was shocked, to tell you the truth. I remember what happened was his lawyer called me on like a Thursday night or something, and said he wanted to cooperate. Just blown away. I immediately called the attorney, and she was really like she was afraid what did I say? You know what I mean? Because I was so new, and I just said I'm going to speak to you, and that's how it all started. So.
Do you think
So
it was your rapport building that was, I don't want, you seem like a humble guy. You're not, a guy that's going to, exude much, but you have to admit, you probably were the reason for it. I mean, just your ability to just kind of know him a little bit, do something here or there. Now, again, a lot of it probably to do with his charges and he just didn't want to go to prison. But do you think your rapport building helped considerably with that?
yeah, like I don't want to take the credit for it, but this is from his mouth. He
Yeah.
actually told me too. He goes, "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have done this." And
You believe him though?
I do believe him because you know it's all about the timing too, right? But I do think the rapport that we built, the respect that I showed him, it's like I always tell guys too later who I had to supervise. It's like don't be a tough guy if you're not a tough guy. These guys they figure you out within 5 to 10 minutes tops. You know what I mean? So and plus, I always tell people too, there's a day you have to give the badge back. So don't try to be a tough guy behind the badge because that's not going to work. Treat people with respect the way you would want to be treated, and that's how I always thought too. If I was to be locked up, I wouldn't want some jerk off trying to give me a hard time. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just put yourself in their shoes. You know what I
Makes
mean? So
sense.
just treat them with respect. You know what I mean? We're on that side. They're on here. Just be respectful. You know what I mean? And that's always worked for me. And I've had plenty of bad guys who we've just agreed not to cooperate. We're still cordial. We're still friendly. I'm not going to name names, but it's like we can have a conversation and just move on. And that's just the way it is.
You
But
mentioned real quick, you mentioned the kind of fact that it was so historical that Anthony Capo flipped because he was the first person to ever do this. This is a family that goes back really deep. Talk about like early to mid 1910s, 20s. What also happens though is kind of a wave of people then start to do it as well. But take me back to Missouri. Tell people a little bit about who Charles Missouri is. Tell people a little bit about who John D'Amato was, because John D'Amato was actually kind of the inspiration a bit for a storyline in The Sopranos. Tell people a little bit about Missouri, though.
so John D'Amato made himself the acting boss after John, the official boss. It was Riggy went to jail. And he actually ended up getting killed in 1991, I believe. It all depends on who you actually speak to. Not to judge anyone because times have changed everything, but back then, from what I was told by Anthony, he told me that it wasn't acceptable for John D'Amato to be having homosexual relationships with people, right? And that he couldn't be the boss of the family. But that was one of the reasons why he got killed. You speak to Anthony Rotundo, and Anthony Rotundo will tell you the main reason that he got killed was because he owed so much money to everybody else, and he was borrowing money from the other families and saying that it was for the DeCavalcante family. Meanwhile, it was for himself. So he got killed back in 1991. Anthony actually was the shooter on that particular of the murder on that one, and Victor DiChiara was the driver. At that particular time, Anthony Campo reported to Anthony Rotundo, and if I remember the conversation correctly, he got his orders from Rudy Ferrone and from Vincent Palermo and Anthony Rotundo, and Anthony Campo, who was a stickler for the rules as well, made sure that he got the order from his captain at the time, Anthony Rotundo, in case anything ever came back to haunt him related to that. He wanted to make sure that he got his order from his captain. Charlie Maggiore actually had a father named Frank Maggiore, who was a DeCavalcante made member as well. Charlie Maggiore, after D'Amato gets killed, he's always been a made member and had a vie for power. Back in the late 1990s, before the show came out, he actually became part of the ruling panel. There was a 3-man ruling panel after Jake Maury gets killed. I'm sorry, he didn't get killed. He actually dies of stomach cancer in 1997. After that happens, Steve Atabli implements a ruling panel. The ruling panel was Jimmy Palermo, Vinny Palermo, and Charlie Maggiore. It's ironic when we talk about the show back and forth, but if you watch the first season of the show, the boss in the show actually dies of stomach cancer. The real life guy is Jake Maury, who died in, I believe it was June of 1997.
Jackie Aprile.
Yeah. So he dies of stomach cancer. And the real life guy is Jake Maury, who dies of stomach cancer. And I believe Jake died in 1997, I believe.
You have a part in your book where you kind of talk about how, I believe it was Joe Tinier Sclafani is on a wiretap phone call where they're talking about the Sopranos, and he says, are they supposed to be us? Is that?
Yeah. So the show starts in January of 1999. I get to the squad in December of 1998. And then in March of 99, Ralph Guarino, I believe, was in a car with Anthony Rotundo and I believe Joseph Tinio Scafani, and they're talking about the show. And the show had only been out for about 3 months. And it was great for trial, right? It was great to play a trial, especially the transcript of trial, where they're saying, "Oh, this is you, this is you." So it's kind of hard to say to defeat that at trial when they're talking about the show. And even during the actual trial, the judge had to give instructions about the show too, because making sure that anyone on the jury wouldn't, say that the show would influence their decision during the trial.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. He actually made that comment.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting. Because I wanted to ask you about, did it make it more difficult to prosecute people because of the show, or you didn't?
No, it's and that started, I did a year of trials from December of 2002 up until probably November of 2003. The first trial was the Joe Canigliaro trial, the murder that we talked about there before. I wasn't sitting at the table. There was Nora Conley, Stacey Bowery were at the table, but that trial was the murder of Joe Pitts. We called it the wheelchair trial, where you had a bunch of people that actually went to trial that time. Mike Massa took a plea deal on the eve of trial. He took 35 years. He took a plea deal. We actually tried to get him to cooperate even before the December 1999 arrest. And he just would not play ball with us, even though we knew that Joe Pitts tortured him, extorted him left and right, and he just would not decide to cooperate with us. So we knew that he had some involvement with the murder, and he eventually ended up being arrested. And on the eve of trial, he decided to take a plea. A couple of people ended up going to trial, and they were convicted. 2 people got life. It was probably one of the best consensual recordings we ever had, where on Marty Lewis was the actual shooter, and we have on tape of them talking about the actual shooting. And if I remember correctly, Marty Lewis and them described, the cooperator was Tommy DeTore, who was arrested in December of 1999. On the consensual recording, they actually say that we shot him, we got out of the car, and then Joe Pitts drove up the street and put his signal on and drove himself to the hospital, which is insane.
Yeah.
When he was driving to the hospital, though, he stopped at Joe Brightson's house. Joe Brightson was part of the murder as well, picked up Joe Brightson and drove him to the hospital with him. So you can imagine Joe Brightson's face when the guy that he just conspired to kill shows up at his house to pick him up to drive him to the hospital because he had just been shot. But it's one of the best consensual recordings the Bureau ever had because you have the whole murder on tape. So there was no way they were going to beat that at trial.
The big question that then I think a lot of people would then have is, I've seen you mentioned Massa, takes a plea. Why even offer a plea? The case was so strong. Why does the Bureau do that? Because like I've seen them offer pleas to guys with 5 bodies. Why?
Because especially nowadays, right? Getting 12 people to agree on anything is really hard to do.
That's true.
And then when you get someone to plead guilty, it's a plea and it's done.
Yeah.
When you go to trial, there's an appeal process.
That's true.
And that goes on for years. It goes on for years. So appeal is a solid deal. You know what I mean? Where it's over. It's like when I worked gangs after I did this for about 15 years, we had a guy who took a plea deal for 40 years.
Yeah.
And you got to look at it both ways, right? From my side, it's like, all right, it's 40 years. We could have went to trial and gotten life. But think of it from his side too. He took 40 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you got to think about that too.
There's a guy in the Colombo family, Vito Guzzo. He took 38 years. He just got out recently. So yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, there's also that little word called technicality where you can have those pop up. You mentioned the appeals process is always lengthy and drawn out. So that makes sense. With Capo, I think the interesting thing about him is it was a long process. He had to testify in a lot of different trials. You had to kind of move him around. And the wild thing that a lot of people don't talk about is September 11th happens during all this stuff. So it was a kind of a long process with Capo and these other guys.
Yeah, and what was great was, okay, so he's the first one to flip, right? And then because he was so wild to control, he reported to Vinny Palermo, right? Which turned out to be horrible for Vinny because he did a lot of his violent acts with Vinny. Vinny at the time became the acting panel boss, right? Back in 1997 after Jake Amori, dies. So Vinny was a businessman. He's got to make a decision, right? Does he cooperate or not cooperate? And he actually decided to cooperate. So he cooperates back in March of 2000. Then right after that, Victor DiChiara decides to cooperate. Victor was the one who was the driver on the John D'Amato murder. So then he decides to cooperate. So now we go from no cooperators in 100 years to having 3 cooperators in literally 4 months. So then
it's pretty unbelievable. Bonanno's had the same thing happen to them. Frank Coppola.
Well,
and then
it's funny you bring that up because this squad, C10, was doing both families at the same time. It's a historic squad where we're split down the middle. Half of us are working Bonanno's, half of us are working the DeCavalcante family, and we're dismantling 2 families at the same time. It was unheard of. We were like working around the clock.
Tell me about Vinny Ocean. A lot of people believe that I don't think he's the inspiration for Tony Soprano is probably a little crazy. What kind of guy was he? What was he like?
Well, he was a smart man. Like lots of a business savvy, lots of types of businesses that he had. He made a business decision, actually to cooperate. He negotiated that he wanted to be out on bail. So again, that caused a lot of manpower to be very lean for us. As I said, we're trying to dismantle 2 families at the same time. We put him up in a safe house. So that's 24-hour protection. So we had to do that. Here I am trying to debrief Capo out of prison. So I'm going back and forth. I'm a new agent. So I'm actually learning organized crime through him.
Through
He's
him.
teaching me that, which is awesome. I'm sitting down and he's telling me all the crimes that he's committed, which, you know, is a little scary when I'm taking notes and listening to all the crazy things that he's done, right? You know, from home invasions, which to me was probably the most despicable thing, because, you know, like you hear these stories where they dress up as cops and, you know, like you're going into somebody's house on a false pretense that, you know, there's an intruder in the backyard or something like that, which is really, really bad, right? And you put people down and you tie them up and you steal things from them, which is really bad. And he knew that kind of like ticked me off too. So he would try to like back that down a little bit too. But like all the crimes that you could think of. So as I started to say there before, we have these three cooperators together, and now we're going to take all their information and lead us to the next arrest. So we had Vinny at his safe house. We're starting to guard him. He wanted to make himself human to us, so he would cook us food, you know, which is kind of odd, right? But he did have the experience through the restaurants that he had, so he was a great cook, right? You know, and he would do push-ups and sit-ups and try to keep himself in shape. He tried to talk to you. So the whole thing was just kind of odd, though, right? It's like here you are with the boss that you're trying to protect, like you're trying to protect him at a safe house. We have multiple things that are happening at the same time where we're trying to debrief Capo. We have Victor now. So, and you got to keep all these guys, they can't be together because you fear of collusion, right? Which that's you deal with that at trial where they try to say these guys all got together and they got their story straight, which never happened, right? You got to keep them away from each other. So then we have all these three guys together. They all have to plead guilty. And when you plead guilty, you just don't plead guilty to the crimes that you're charged with. You have to tell the government all the crimes that you have done. And what people don't understand either, and this happens some of the trials too, when you plead guilty, it's not like you say that I did this crime with Vinny and Joey and Tommy, whatever. It's just that you're pleading guilty to the murder of John D'Amato. So you say, I and others. You don't say who those others are.
Gotcha.
You just say that. When I'm debriefing him, he's telling me who the others are, and that's how we charge people later. But when you plead guilty, when you go in front of the judge, and even your plea agreement, that's what it says. So we get these three cooperators together, we get all their information, and now we're going to have our next set of indictments. And that takes us to October 2000, and that's known as the hierarchy indictments, where we basically take the official boss, we take the two other panel men, like Jimmy Palermo, Charlie Maggiore, we take the consigliere, Steve Batabli, a bunch of captains, and that's we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of that. That'll be October 19th. That'll be the 25th anniversary of that.
I never use the word, you know, defunct a lot of the time when it comes to these families, but in terms of what these investigations, in the end, there were 7 trials. 71 defendants were convicted or pled, and you served, I believe you figured out 11 murders or so.
Right.
This pretty much destroyed the DeCavalcante Crime Family due to the fact that most of the governing body went to prison. I want to ask you, though, about the people that cooperated, and let's say the people that didn't, you know, the people like Maggiore, Batabili, Pino, all those guys, old timers, been around a long time. Why do you think some of them just say, you know what, fuck it, essentially, I'm going to jail. I have no interest in talking to you. And why do some people become Anthony Capo or Rotundo? Like, what is it in them? Do you know? I mean, you were around these people. Do you know?
Yeah, it's like it's hard to say why. It's like I respect them for it. I've said that to them before that they don't want to play ball. I respect their decision. I don't understand it. You know, I couldn't go to jail for 20 to 30 years. That's not me. You know, some people thrive in jail. It's like, you know, I've seen some things like Charlie Stango. He spent most of his adult life in jail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's not for me. So you can't. And it's just that some of these guys, that's what they have grown up with. That's what they're used to. But I can't determine why. You know what I mean? It's like it's really hard to figure that out. You know, why some do and some don't. I think it does come down sometimes to families too. You know what I mean? Like, we can get into later about some of the Colombos and stuff and why people had decided to cooperate there. But yeah, I think it depends on the family that you have too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the kids.
Like the base you have.
Sure, absolutely. Anthony Capo was a good witness for you, right? He did
Awesome witness. And it's like, that's what was so surprising, because Anthony was a hothead. And like, I had heard that. And, you know, there was an instance where I actually got to see it, right? Where, you know, when I met him at first, he was very calm, very cool. And then there was an incident where he was accused. There was the Coltsnet murders of two stockbrokers back in, I think it was October of 1999, where he was accused of that. And the Monmouth County prosecutor's officers wanted to speak to him about it because they thought he was a shooter. So they came up and spoke to him, and he had nothing to do with it, and he was cleared of that. But it was interesting to see the exchange between them and him, because they came at him like really hard. And I saw the other side of him where he gave it back to them. And I was like, that's the guy that I heard about. You know what I mean? But he testified for me like 7 times. And that's 7 times that he testified. That's not the times that he was prepped for trial. He was prepped for trial a lot more, where people decided to play out at the last moment. And I have even heard defense attorneys say, who is this guy that's on the stand? He's a different person. And that I can say that I helped him with, where I was able to prep him, coach him, kind of get him under control. Not to be combative. You know, there was a couple of times where I might have lost my cool, and where I had to kind of refrain myself to say, okay, if I want him to be calm, I have to be calm, right? You know, but you know, he was great on the stand, and each time he got better and better, and you could see he would get not smart with the defense attorneys, but he was able to handle them. And you know, he would banter with them back and forth, not in a combative way, but in a good way. So, and I would say between him and Rotundo, they were great for us, because Anthony Rotundo testified probably 7 or 8 times as well. But, you know, you could say that they became professionals, you know.
What?
And it's funny because at first no one wants to testify, right? You know, but I think he started to enjoy it. Like this became a job for him. And you know, he used to always say to me too, that he wanted to succeed for me. And I be like, don't succeed for me, succeed for yourself. Like, you know, I want you to succeed. I want this to be your second chance to succeed at life.
I know when a lot of people read your book, Flipping Capo, how the FBI dismantled the real Sopranos, you'll get to know how, like, really truly close you almost were. Anthony Capo ultimately died in the witness protection program. He was pretty young. Believe he was late 50s, early 60s. You know, looking back, I mean, it's been pretty long since he died. Would you say you considered him like a friend? Like, I know that's kind of, you know,
Yeah, I think that's a little bit much.
but like you cared, like you
Yeah,
felt
I definitely
sadness.
cared about him. It's like when I heard that he passed away, that was kind of a jolt to me. I wasn't expecting that because of the timing too. It's like we had just spoken, and he was just getting ready to be sentenced. You know, that was the odd part, or like the eerie part, where he was going to be sentenced about a week or 2 later. So I thought he was just calling me to, you know, go over things again. And he kept on telling me that, okay, when I go to court, I'm going to give you all the credit. I'm like, don't give me the credit. It's like, this is something that you did. You know, it's like, I'm going to be there to support you. And I was actually going to speak in court for him. You know what I mean? Because, you know, that's the sad part. I just thought he never got the credit that he really had deserved. You know what I mean? It's like, because if it wasn't for him, this would not have happened. I'm a firm believer of that. It's like he started this whole thing of spiral effect of cooperation, of getting Vinny to cooperate, and then Victor and Anthony Rotundo and Scarabino. I think all in all, we had 7 people cooperate during that time frame. And when I look back at things since that time frame to now, no other made members have cooperated within that family. So it's like 25 years plus. You know, it's a very, you know, unique thing to say, you know, but I really do think I wouldn't, you know, did we have a bond? Yes. Is it someone that I would go out and have a drink with or dinner? I don't know. I could say that, but I do think that he really did make the most of his second chance, and it's unfortunate that he's not around today.
And you also talked about how, like, when he went into the program, like, you don't like talk to him, like, you don't know where he is, you don't.
Right.
I learned about the program in speaking to someone that is connected to Joe Messina, and about a year ago, yeah, I put a video out about some of the details that I'd found out about his time in the program. He wasn't in it for very long, but the FBI, they just kind of move you somewhere random, and they just throw you somewhere, and it's kind of a quiet, lonely existence. A lot of the time the families don't go with you. Sometimes they do. But you didn't have like any contact. You just kind of found it out, and that was it.
Well, the WITSEC program is run by the Marshal Service, right? So you work hand in hand with them. There's a lot of paperwork that you have to go through. They really do like vet out the person, making sure the biggest thing is they want to make sure that the individual is not going into the program to hurt someone.
Right.
And then they do a great job. They got to make sure that they're plotting out the states so that you're not with someone else, to make sure that you're not both in the same state. There is a process that they have where if Anthony wanted to call me, he can't pick up the phone and call me. He has to go through the Marshal Service, and there's a special number that would pop up on my screen where I would know that it's them. Anthony was a little slick where, he liked football, so he would call me and tell me what type of fan that he suddenly was, right? Like suddenly I like the Lions, so I would know that he was in Detroit.
I knew where he was.
Or I like the Browns, so I know he would be next to Cleveland, right? So he thought he was slick that way. But yeah, they're very successful, the Marshals, because they do vet things out, but it is a process. You mentioned Joe Messina there. Again, that was the same squad as me. I was lucky enough to be on that arrest. That was Jeff Sollett and Kim's case. So I was lucky to be on that arrest.
Really, you went to his house?
Yeah.
What was that like?
He was a very smart man. He wanted to leave there as quick as he could. Like he was ready to go. And Joe was very.
What was he wearing? Do you remember?
I forget. I think it might have been a sweatsuit. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Yeah, but he was ready. A lot of these guys that have been around a long time, they know the drill. Don't wear a lot of stuff so that you don't have your watches, your jewelry, whatever. So, but he wanted to leave really, really quickly. And, based upon my career, what happened was after I got through with the family here, then I got the Colombos. And then after the Colombos, after the big arrest in January of 2011, then I got the Bonanno family back too. So I had to deal with Joe. Joe testified against Vincent Asaro. So I had to deal with Joe then. So.
Let's stick with the Bonannos. You also were pretty involved with Vincent Asaro. He was, he's a guy that, we've talked about a lot on this channel, had, involvement really since his youth in the life. He was even arrested later in life for ordering people to light cars on fire, of motorists, cut them off in traffic. Just kind of a quirky. We know he had a substance abuse problem when he was young, degenerate gambler from what I know about him. Tell me a little bit about Vinny Asaro and what was the case involving him?
Right. So I kind of dealt with him at the end, related to after I got the Bonanno family back. We had a proactive witness named Gaspar Valente, who is his cousin.
Yeah.
The handlers were Adam Menini and Rob Yepler. So they proactively ran Mr. Valente for a couple of years. It was no surprise that Mr. Valente cooperated when you listen to the recordings, because Vinny was extremely nasty to his cousin, to say the least. So we operated him for a couple of years, and one of the information that we got was the murder of Paul Katz. So this is related to Goodfellas, where it was Jimmy Burke had killed Paul Katz, had Paul Katz killed in his basement and had him buried there. This is back in 1969. And then in the 80s, he used Gaspar Valente and also Jerry Asaro to move the body. And at that point in time, Jimmy Burke had gone to jail for the Boston Point shaving scandal. And I believe he had allegedly had some cops on the payroll back then and was getting a little scared that IAD was going to start speaking to those cops, so he wanted the body moved. And he had it moved back in the 80s, the early 80s. So this is one of the things that Gaspar Valente tells us. So now I'm the supervisor of the squad. And in June of 2013, one of the last acts as a supervisor is we did a search warrant in Jimmy Burke's basement. So Gaspar Valente was still the witness then. And we decided to leave Gaspar Valente out on the street still while we were executing the search warrant with Vincent Asaro. So Vincent Asaro knew that we were in Jimmy Burke's basement digging for the body because, you know, these are non-professional people that when they were digging up the body, they were going to leave parts behind. So we actually left Gaspar Valente out there for a couple of hours that day just to get a temperature check to see how Vinny was going to react to that. Of course, he wasn't happy. And we took Mr. Valente off the street that day. Subsequently, we're doing a dig. And what happened that day when we were doing the dig is our evidence response team knocked the water main pipe out, which knocked the water out for the neighborhood. And I was the commander on scene at the time, so we had to get DEP down there. I had the number 2 guy for DEP come down and kind of look at the situation, assess everything. He actually turned out to be a guy that went to Cardinal Spellman. And he helped us out with everything. But during that time period, we had to go to the bathroom. So we had to go up to next to Liberty Avenue underneath the train tracks there. And we go up and I look across the street and there's a Bonanno body shop there. And who's outside the Bonanno body shop? Vincent Asaro. And I'm like, he's right there. And Vinny was still in like great shape. So we're across the street. We have the raid jackets on, and we're going to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, we got to say something. And the guys that I were with, they're like, we can't say anything. I was like, we got to say something. So we actually go to the bathroom. We cross over to the train tracks, and we're coming back. And I know that Vinny had a problem with his heart before. So I stop and I talk to him. We're starting some small talk back and forth. And at the end of the conversation, I just tap him on the shoulder and well, even before that, I just said, oh, we're just working down the block here. And he knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. So I just tapped him on the shoulder and I said, oh, we're just working down the block here. And I said, at the end of the conversation, I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, oh, I'll see you soon. And then I left. And that was in June. So January comes, I knock on his door and I told him, I told you I'd see you soon. So took him back to 26 Federal Plaza. And he thought that was the funniest thing. He was telling everyone that was locked up that day. He was just laughing his head off, and it just showed you that he had a good sense of humor, right? So, but as you know yourself, he beat that case.
Yeah,
which was
Gaspar
crazy.
Valente wasn't a great witness, from what I understand.
That case, you know, I'm not going to get into why I think they didn't win, but. They should have won the case. I just thought it was a very long case, and I'm not going to get into why I don't think they won. But he actually did beat the case.
You mentioned the sense of humor of Asaro. I don't know if you ever saw him, but when he came out of lockup and getting off that case, he made a funny comment about bodies in the trunk.
Yeah,
pretty funny, actually.
And then, you know, they locked him up again, and that's when he pled guilty, I think, to the arson, and he went to jail for a couple of years. And unfortunately, I think he passed, right?
He did, I believe 2 years ago. We actually, I don't know how much you watch of this mob tube stuff, but the kid that put him in, that cooperated against him, Gene Borrello, he's on these YouTube streets here. So yeah, we hear about him a lot. You know, Ronnie G's his nephew, and
okay.
I also want to ask you about the Colombo family. You mentioned them. You were involved with a guy we just did a video on recently, Joey Caves, Dino Calabro. You talk about violent people. I mean, they were.
So I was a supervisor of the Colombo squad from after I finished working this case. I actually was the supervisor of Colombo squad from December 2004 up until June of 2013, just as we just discussed there. When I got to the Colombo squad, you know, they asked me to go down to be supervisor, and to be honest, I just thought I was too young to be the supervisor. I'd only had 6 years on the job at that particular time. And I thought I still needed a lot to learn, even though I was exposed to a lot at such an early age. But I went down there, and at that time, I think they had 8 supervisors in 8 years. So I was going from a great squad to a squad that was in kind of flux. But I said, if I go down there, I definitely want some sort of stability. So I went down there. I was able to turn that squad around, and we did some great things. We ended up dismantling that family. And the first big case we had was in June of 2008, where we did arrest, it was Joe Caves, Dino Calabro, Sonny Franzese, Tommy Gioli, Mike Catapano. So that was the first big case we had. And that was in June of 2008. The first guy to flip in that case was Joe Caves. And we were totally shocked that he was the first guy to flip. And I have to give all the credit to the agent, was John Fallon. And how that came about was we had served Joe Caves a subpoena beforehand. And how it went about was John approached the family. And if I get the story correct, I remember that he went to go to the house and his wife was there, and she was coming out of the house with her kids. And John, such a great agent, he decided not to approach her right at that particular time because she was with her kids. So he let the kids go on the bus, and then he followed her to Dunkin' Donuts, and she had seen him, and he went to Dunkin' Donuts, and that's when he served her with the subpoena. So she was appreciative that he was respectful enough not to do it in front of her kids. And I think she kept that in the back of her mind. Subsequently, he was arrested, and John was the team leader on that particular arrest. And again, he treated Joe with respect. When you do an arrest, sometimes you see some items that you might have to give back. I was always a big proponent of that you could give an item back. It gives you an opportunity to go meet a family member and speak to them, because the circumstances are now a little different, right? On the day of an arrest, you might meet a family member who's in a different set of emotions, right? Where they're not thinking straight, or they might be very hostile towards you. Now, after an arrest, you go back and you give them an item that you might have taken, a phone or a phone book or something like that, and you might have an opportunity to speak to them, and they might think a little that they might want to cooperate. So we arrested Joe Caves. He was respectful, and then sure enough, and I think it was the end of August, beginning of September, probably beginning of September, John gets a phone call from his wife that Joe Caves wants to cooperate. So John and myself go out and we meet her and meet her family. And, one thing that people don't realize is with the witnesses, you just don't deal with a witness, you deal with their family. And Joe had a very close-knit family, believe it or not, even though a lot of people say some things about Joe, what type of person he was, and he was. But he was very close to his family, and his wife was the glue, and she was able to get him to cooperate, and that's how it all started. And I'll never forget, the first proffer we have with him. We go in there, and he tells us about 3 bodies, and the way Joe described, he just says that there's 3 bodies that are buried right next to each other. So me and you would think, okay, there's 3 bodies right next to each other. Those 3 bodies were not right next to each other. Those 3 bodies were basically 1.1 miles apart from each other. So it was, and when someone tells you that there's bodies involved, what you immediately have to do is you have to go and secure the site. Because if the mob guys realize that someone is missing, right, if they're not in the prison that they say they're in, they might be cooperating. Or if they're in transit, they might be cooperating. So we had to immediately go out to Farmingdale, Long Island, and secure the site. It turned out when we brought Joe out there that there was 3 different sites, right there. And the murder victims were Wild Bill Catullo, Richie Greaves, and Carmine Gargano. And Richie Greaves was allegedly by the train tracks. Carmine Gargano was on the corner of the building, and Wild Bill Catullo was in a back field by the burn. So that's the first information that we get from Joe Caves, which is unreal, right? Can you imagine sitting there and that's the first thing that you hear? Absolutely. So we are off to the races. And we get our ERT, group out there, And, the first, back then, there's been a lot of digs that I've been involved with, not to jump back and forth, but you get constant pressure from your bosses, like what's going on, because now like you have the press involved. And I remember in the site where Carmine Gargano was put, they had built a new building. So there was a good chance that he was moved during the excavation of the building. But I'll say it now, we actually did find a tarp, and we found a dog that was buried in a tarp. Like, who puts a dog buried in a tarp? But it turned out to be a dog. So that was the first thing that we found, which wasn't a body, it was actually a dog. So there was a no-go there. And again, I'm getting constant pressure from my bosses. What's going on? This is happening every day. And I'll jump back to a banana thing in a minute. But that was nothing there. Then we went to the Richie Greaves site. So we have 3 different sites at the same time, nothing there. And then we have the Wild Bill site in the back. And if I remember correctly, Joe Caves tells us that there's a berm, and it's behind the berm. So we dig behind the berm, nothing there. We actually, and I think we were out there probably for maybe 8 days. I'm kind of forgetting right now, but I think it was close to 8 days, and nothing. And we had our evidence response team basically dug us an Olympic-sized pool. There was nothing there. But we brought Joe back out again, and he was telling us the berm, and we were looking up at the sky. And this is an amazing story where my team ourselves, they say, Seamus, do you mind if we go get some shovels? I'm like, why not? It's like, we're just looking at each other. Let's go get some shovels. It turns out there was a second berm. So we get shovels. C-38 is the name of the squad. We get shovels and we dig in one area, nothing. Then we dig in another area, and lo and behold, what the Colombos used to do is they used to kill people, bury them, and then put lime on top of the body. What lime does is lime kills the smell, but preserves the body.
Mm-hmm.
So we're digging, and next thing you know, we see the white stuff. And I'm like, holy shit.
Here we go.
So we stop everybody, right? Because we're not professionals, right? We stop everybody, and we're like high fives, everything. Because what we do is we see that Wild Bill was hogtied, face down, his feet were up in the air. I stop everyone, and then I go get ERT, and I bring them back to this site, and sure enough, it's Wild Bill. So that's how we found Wild Bill. Then what we do is, I guess about a month later, we decide Carmine Gargano was killed in a body shop in McDonald Avenue in Brooklyn. We say, you know what? Let's go back to the body shop.
Yep.
And they killed him there. They buried him there, and then they decided, this is not a good idea to keep him there. Let's move him out to Long Island. So we said, let's go back to the shop, and we dug in the shop, and we're digging ourselves again, our own squad, and what we find the line. We're like, jackpot. So again, we found, unfortunately, pieces of Carmine Gargano, and we were able to tie that to DNA from the family to give closure to the family. So
that's
Joe Caves,
Carmine Gargano. He's Carmine Gargano is a sad story. He was just
yeah. It's very sad. He just got involved with the wrong people. It's very sad. But Joe Caves started that whole thing, and as a result of him cooperating, then it was Dino, and then it was Sebi, and just opened the floodgates there. And one of the things just about that squad, which was just amazing, is we had to change our tactics, right? With the DeCavalcante case. Back then, it was the early 1999, 2000, 2001. NCIS was just a new show, right? where everyone was starting to catch on. Okay, you can solve a crime within 42 minutes, and it's like the DNA, excuse me, where now we had to get everything on tape. So we changed the strategy that we had. When I went to the Colombo squad, my first thought process was, how am I going to hit them? So I'm like, okay, I want to hit them in the pocket, and I want to hit them related to the violence. So we had two different proactive witnesses, right? So we're going to make consensual recordings, and that's what we did. And I think when I look back, the stats that I remember is we probably made 1,800 consensual recordings in 7.5 years, which is ungodly, where these guys were working around the clock. And people don't understand, when you make a consensual recording, it could be 3 hours long. It could take you a day to listen to that, to try to find that little piece of information that you need.
Because a lot of it's just like small talk and stuff that doesn't mean anything. I know you're not going to answer this, but I'll ask you anyway. Campi won't answer. I'll ask you, where do they put the wire?
If the wire could be anywhere. And that's the thing. That's the beauty.
He said,
no, we're not going to tell you, but it's like the Bureau is getting good. It's like we keep adapting, and we use things that you would never think of. And that's like the best thing, is because the wise guys are good too. You know what I mean? They're always going to they're always going to think about things. And I'll just say one thing. It's like, from where I grew up in like the Bronx, one thing is I always try to think like a perp, right? Because that's the way that I was raised. I remember, and I'm not going to say the Colombo May guy's name, but we went into a prison, right? And they wanted to have the bad guy have the wire underneath the table. And I said, not a chance in hell. I said, the first thing the Colombo guy is going to do, he's going to flip the table.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, he's not going to do that. I'm like, he's going to do that. So I said, let's do this. So we put him into the prison. What happens? Flips the table. I said, I told you guys, he's too smart. I was like, you got to think like me, because I'm thinking like them.
Yeah, that's how you got to think of it.
Yep.
There's a guy, I won't say who, there's a guy in the Bonanno family who's arrested within the last few years. He made a individual strip because he believed that would be the way to go. He didn't realize that technology got so good that they don't put this big gargantuan thing on you now. And he was still recorded. He didn't realize a watch or in sunglasses. But I want to play a quick game with you. Quick hitter questions. Then I'll talk about your book. We'll get you out of here. In all your time of being around wise guys and flipping them and all that sort of thing, friendliest mobster you were ever around?
Friendliest mobster. That's a good one.
Were there any?
Hey, I never had a problem with the mobster. Tell you the truth.
Really?
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there was no one that gave me a hard time. I like Steve Atabli from the DeCavalcantes.
Old school guy.
Teddy Persico. I liked him.
Really?
Yeah.
What about
always friendly?
What about most ruthless guy that you just didn't get got a feeling he was just different than?
Well, Joe Caves was a bad guy.
Yes, he was.
He was a bad guy. Like Joe, you could see Joe has a switch.
Yeah.
You have to be careful. You know
what
I mean? That. And like knock on some serious wood. He hasn't gotten into any types of trouble since he's been out. But Joe has a switch. You have to be careful.
Did you notice that most of these people? Did you kind of think in a way, man, this is kind of a shame, because a lot of these people they're pretty smart. They're inquisitive. They have the ability to run businesses.
Look at Anthony Rotundo, right? The guy went to college.
Sure.
Right? It's just it's the way that he was raised. If he had applied himself or went a different direction, and he did great after he had his second chance. He had his own business. He did a great job. You know what I mean? It's all the way that you're raised too. You know what I mean? So some of these guys, they don't have a chance. So it's kind of tough.
Do you miss being in the FBI?
I miss the people. I think the last few years it's been kind of tough. They've gotten a lot of shots thrown at them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they have.
And they're changing the resources too. It's always been the needs of the bureau, and you've seen. I think they just got rid of the C-16, which is tough.
Let
So
me ask you though. You can tell us this. I don't. I think it's a little crazy to think that they're just not looking at the mob anymore. They're just downsizing, right?
that they're what?
They're just downsizing, right? It's not like they're going to stop watching the mob.
Yeah, I'd say that they're just not having as many resources there. It's like the mob's been around for 125 years. They're
Yeah.
not going away. They're just going, and if you don't put the resources to it, they're just going to rebuild, you know. And just like we adapt at work, they're going to adapt. There's always ways. There are smart guys in the mob. They're going to find ways to make money. They always do.
Absolutely. Final question. You mentioned Sonny Franzese. Did you ever meet Sonny?
Yeah, because we had a trial with Sonny.
What
So
was he like?
he was fine, but he was older then too. You know what I mean? So, but Sonny, we had Sonny on tape a lot because what happened was when I first got to the Colombo squad, we had Guy Furtado. I don't know if you
Yeah, I
remember
know that.
him.
Sure.
So the agent that ran him on our squad was Vinny. It was D'Agostino. So Vinny was a new agent, and he lived out east, and he actually ran Guy, and he reported like Sonny a lot. You know, and
So
Sonny
you
said
heard
a lot.
so you were able to hear the tape where Sonny talks about you get a pool and you put a body in a pool and you cut them up and you put them in a microwave. You've heard that?
Yeah, just a little disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say. I urge everybody, if you're wherever you're listening, go get the book, pre-order the book. I really enjoyed this book, Flipping Capo. I've never really read a book involving maybe Jack Garcia with Greg De Palma, but even your relationship with Capo was, I think, even more kind of interesting. You almost seem like friends, and I'm not saying you were, but you had that relationship. Really great book. I loved it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. It's been great to speak to you. And as like you said, the book has a lot of nice little tidbits in it. So feel free to buy it.
What made you write the book?
Well, I had been approached by a couple of people about my career. So I said, all right, let me give it a shot. You know what I mean? And I really do think, I don't think anything's been written about our squad. And I really do think the squad is a really historic squad, and it doesn't get the justification that they deserve. As I said, the squad basically dismantled two families at the same time. It was a very unique time period from 99 to 2004 and 5. So hopefully this book, it does focus on the Jersey family, but it does give a little glimpse into the Bonanno family as well. So, and I was blessed to work with great people, supervisors, mentors, teammates, partners. They really did a great job. And also the prosecutors from the Southern District were just amazing. And I really do think they spoiled me for the rest of my career.
Something you do in your book as well that I've never really seen before, and I think it was a really interesting key to the book. You talk about your personal life, which I found to be pretty cool. You talked about the loss of your father, just the tribulations of being an agent and like having to deal with your regular life. Because we don't really hear much about that. Like when you watch Donnie Brasco, there's a little bit of that, but like we don't really know what it's like on the family that you have. How do you kind of go through that? I like that about the book. I thought that was a cool kind of twist to it.
Yeah, and it was kind of like I was dealing with trying to flip him, and my dad was sick at the time.
Yeah.
So, and when my dad passed, to get a phone call at the funeral home from Anthony was very surreal, because just a couple of days prior we were up at Phil Lamella's place trying to look for a body, and then shortly after my dad had passed away. So it was kind of a unique time period where I was dealing with a lot at the same time.
I probably should ask you, what did your parents think of all this? Did they find it to be an interesting career choice for you?
I kind of kept them away from everything. I really didn't share too much with with my family about it. You know what I mean? So I think they're going to learn a lot too when they
read it, right?
like read the book.
Yeah. Well, everybody go read the book. I'm going to include the link in the pinned comment. Go check it out. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the big publishers. I enjoyed it. I read it quite quickly, and I appreciate them for sending it to me. Seamus McElearney, you're a well-to-do agent. You did a great job. You were one of the most integral, really, over the last 20 years of really trying to extinguish the mob in this country. One thing that I think the FBI did a very good job of. They're still around, but they're nowhere near what they once were. Thank you for coming on the show, and good luck with the book. I hope everybody go checks it out.
All right, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for having
you guys
thanks for coming on the show, and appreciate everybody. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down. Seamus, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, Jeff. Thank you. So when do you